I just figured you guys can wait. This is the second in a series of the line in the sand. And basically the idea is the fact that we as Christians have to come to a point where we say that's enough. That we give in, we compromise, we bend where we can. But there has to be a certain point. Now, with me, I call it my line of integrity. That I will bend as far as I can, but there's a point that it stops. That we have to stand very strong there and not compromise what we are saying or doing as far as the world is concerned. So that's what we're going to get at. And what we see with Elijah today, Elijah is a very interesting guy. He shows up just for 3 chapters in the Bible, in 1 Kings 17, 18, and 19. But he does something that attracts attention. And there are times I think that we as Christians, as a church, need to do something to attract the attention back to the message that we have. There was a man that lived in Mississippi. His name was George Phillips. And he lived out on the edge of this town. And he, one night, when he and his wife were going to bed, she mentioned that he had left the shed light on. So he went out to turn it off, and when he looked, he saw there were people in the shed robbing him. So he went back to his house, and he got on the phone, called the police, and they asked if anybody was actually in his house. He said no. They said, well, just lock up your house. There's just nobody available to come right now. An officer will come as soon as he's able to come. Okay? So George went back into the house. For about 30 seconds, he got back on the phone, called the police, and he said, I just called about somebody breaking into my shed. You don't need to come out because I just shot and killed them. Well, the next thing that George knew, there were police cars and ambulances and all kinds of emergency vehicles. Even a helicopter showed up putting a light down on the scene. And the robbers were still in the shed, so the police arrested them and took them off to jail until the chief of police came up to George. And he said, I thought you said you killed them. And George said, I thought you said no one was available. Now, I wouldn't suggest doing that to the police, but I think that there comes a time where we have to do something to attract attention to the message, not to us, but to the message that we have. And Elijah is one of those that's going to draw the line. We need to maybe give you a little background here as we look at Elijah. It's a very interesting thing that we see starting in 1 Kings 17, because Elijah shows up. He's not a big name anybody. He's a prophet from God. And he shows up, he goes to Ahab the king, who was a very, very wicked man. If you read in 1 Kings, it will say that Ahab did more wicked than all of his family before him. Bad guy. And then he hooked up with a bad lady. Okay? Her name was, you guys are afraid to talk right now, aren't you? Jezebel. Okay? So between Ahab and Jezebel, the land of Israel was going very much the evil way. So here comes Elijah into the picture. He goes up to Ahab, and he says to Ahab, there will be no more rain until I declare there will be rain. And then he leaves. And God has him go to this stream, and this little ravine, and he stays there. The ravens bring him food, and he's there. But eventually what happens is the brook dries up. Well, what did he prophesy to Ahab? No rain, so the brook's going to dry up. So then God tells him to go to the widow of Zarephath. Okay? And she's about to die, and you can read that story. We're not going to go into that story. Jesus uses the widow of Zarephath in Luke chapter 4. When he talks about God working his miracles with people, and it creates a big problem because the widow of Zarephath is a Gentile, not a Jew. And the thought that, God could work in the lives of those kinds of people, Patty, people in Nazareth didn't like that. Okay? Well, during the process of this time, how many of you know the story? She makes the bread for Elijah, and then the oil that she's running out of doesn't run out. It continues to be there. In the process of time, her son dies. And Elijah revives him, brings him back from the dead, and there's the strong message that he has given her as far as who God is and her belief in God. but he's not popular with Ahab. In fact, if you read the story, you will see where Ahab goes around. He can't find Elijah. That's why God has him hiding the way that he is hiding. So he just finds the other prophets in Israel and just starts killing them off. So Elijah is going around the countryside now. He has left the widow, and Obadiah finds him, and there's the discussion. So here comes Elijah to Ahab. And when Elijah gets there, Ahab looks at Elijah and says, "You troublemaker of Israel. You're the one that's causing all this commotion." And Elijah, in all his strength and courage, looked at Ahab and said, "You're the troublemaker. You're the king, but you're the troublemaker. You're the ones that are leading people away from God." So they had the big discussion. And Elijah says, "I'll tell you what we're going to do. Let's have a contest at Mount Carmel. That you bring all of your prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah, and you bring them there, and we're going to have this contest." Okay? How many of you know this story about the contest? Okay. Now, before we get into that, here he is speaking to Israel in the contest. He speaks to the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah. Okay? If you have a King James Bible, you read out the King James Bible, there's going to be talk at times when kings came into power that they cut down the groves. And that's the prophet and the sign of Asherah. Baal was a fire god, which just fits into the story very well, because they're going to want fire coming down from heaven and find out who the true God is. But Baal was a false god of those days. He was in the form of a bull, if you can make this out. Okay? And what is this man down here doing? He's offering a baby. Okay? Now, these are church people. These are the people of Israel. This is not some pagan, horrible people. These are the respectable, religious people. Okay? That they would put wood or whatever inside of that idol of Baal, and they would heat him up as a furnace. And Baal would sit there with his front legs stuck out. And when it got the hottest it could be, these people would lay their babies on his legs and sacrifice them to Baal. Now, these are the civilized folks. Okay? That's who Baal was. Okay? And there were 450 prophets of Baal that Ahab had, but also we look at Asherah. These are the prophets or prophetesses that Jezebel would have. Okay? And they were involved in this idol worship. And what would happen is that during the course of their idol worship, if you look at groups like this, there's basically two themes that these religious groups rest upon: death and sex. Okay? So whenever they had their rituals, there would be sexual activity. The women would become pregnant. They would have their babies, and then they would bury their babies alive and put them under these trees. And that was their sacrifice to Asherah. Okay? Now, we are appalled that religious, moral people would do something like that. And we're much better than them. You see, we just kill our babies before they're born instead of after. I mean, we're not anything close to these folks, right? 5,470 babies are aborted in our country every day. Unbelievable, isn't it? So these are the decent folks, okay? So what has happened, does that bother you that we are killing 5,000 babies a day? Yes. How much does it bother you? There's the question. There's the question. Elijah is seeing what's going on here, and he gets to the point, folks, he can't take it anymore. He is seeing what's happening. See, the problem that Elijah has here is that he sees all this ungodliness around him. And he has this challenge for them. Boy, if it's not time for the church to stand up and challenge the world, I don't know when it's going to be. If it's not time for us to stand up and say, no, here's the truth, what's it going to take for us to finally get to the point that we can't take it anymore. That's what happens with Elijah. He is looking at these people, and it is bothering him. When we look at the world in which we live, folks, and we're bothered by what we see happening, are we not? With all the crime, the violence, all those things going on. You know, I'm out of town Friday with a family that was losing a family member. And we began to talk about Dr. Goldenstein in Kankakee. My goodness. Have you not heard that story? Does everybody don't need to go into it? He's a retired doctor in Kankakee. This man comes to his door early that morning, knocks on the door, stabs him to death, tries to kill his wife, and then the gentleman that assaulted them walks down the street, tells someone he's just killed 2 people, and slits his own throat. Now, he is still alive, and she is alive, the last I've heard. Does that bother you? Okay. How much? How much do we look around and say, oh, we can't do this anymore? That we have children, and we have young people, and we have elderly. Somebody has to stand up and say, can't do this anymore. I just can't keep quiet anymore. And that's what happens with Elijah. Okay? I'm thinking of another man. His name was Paul, the Apostle Paul. And he's supposed to be, quote, taking a little vacation in Athens, Acts chapter 17. And he is sitting there, and he's waiting for Timothy and a couple of people to come, and he decides to take a walk down the street. And you know what it says? That he was so grieved by what he saw, he couldn't keep quiet. And he starts speaking to the people on the street. He starts talking to them about Christ, the people on the street, and they say, well, you need to talk to these people, the college professors. His sermon at the Areopagus or Mars Hill in Acts 17, one of the greatest sermons recorded. Because he got to the point, what? Just can't take this anymore. We've got to draw the line in the sand, and we've got to do what we can do. And that's a guarded statement here, because there's nothing we can do outside of God leading us to do it. Okay? But Elijah's had enough. He's had enough. His desire is that he wants to turn people back to God. That's what he wants. Is that not our desire? How big of a desire is it? That's all he wants. You read the text. He's just going to want these people to come back to God. It's a critical time. It's a defining moment for Elijah. It's a defining moment for God. That it's time for him to stand up and make some kind of statement for God. We can't allow the world to go unchallenged. We can't. We just can't. We have for 40 years. And now look at us. Now, I'm not just talking about us, I'm talking about the church in general. We had the same, it seems like the same attitude that Europe had toward Hitler. We'll talk about him in just a moment. Just let him have what he wants, and then he won't bother us. Let him have what he wants, and then he won't bother us. There was a Lutheran minister that lived in Poland at the beginning of the time that Nazis were taking over Europe. And I forget who the minister was, but he wrote down in his journal that when they come to get the Jews, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a Jew. When they came to get the Catholics, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a Catholic. And when they come to get me, there was nobody left to say anything. And we have this idea of appeasing. Well, that's the way the world is. There's nothing that we can do about it. And that is not true. It is not true. The problem is, downstairs we were talking about the harvest. In Matthew chapter 9, Luke chapter 10, Jesus says the harvest is plentiful, but there's not enough workers. There's not enough laborers. You need to pray. He didn't pray there'd be a harvest because it's there. He prayed that God would bring forth laborers. Think about it just for a moment, not trying to make you feel guilty or anything. When is the last time that you talked to anyone about their relationship to Jesus? When was the last time that it was so important to you that you went to them and sat down and said, I've got to share this with you. I need to talk to you about this because your eternity is in peril. That is where Elijah is at. He can't let this go on and be unchallenged. He's got to make some kind of statement, and that's what he does. Is he a troublemaker? Folks, the Christians are always troublemakers. Why? Because the truth always causes trouble. Everybody gets upset at truth. Okay? So here's Elijah now, and he makes this challenge. He's a very vocal guy here, but see folks, there comes a time we just can't stand on the sideline. We've got to get in the game somehow. We've got to see what we can do. So he says to Ahab, here's what we're going to do. You bring your prophets of Baal and you bring your prophets of Asherah to Mount Carmel, and we're both going to offer this sacrifice. And whoever answers the prayer their God is the true God. So that's the challenge they have. And Elijah is standing there and he's watching the prophets of Baal. They have their sacrifice there. They're calling for Baal to send fire down from heaven. And it doesn't happen. And they go on and on and on. They're doing this, if my time element is correct, the way I've studied this, for about 6 or 7 hours. They're doing everything they can to get the fire to come down from heaven. And Elijah gets into the mix here by asking them, maybe you can't hear. Maybe you need to yell louder. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he's going to the bathroom and he can't hear you. Finally, they give up. Okay? And there's one little verse in here that I think is so important, that it says the place where Elijah is going to offer his sacrifice is the altar of the Lord. It's in ruins. It's not been used for so long it's falling apart. He repairs it. He puts it back together. And I could have preached a sermon on that, folks. That it's the church that needs to be put back together. That it's the church that needs to establish itself as a place where God's truth is going to reign. It is in Timothy that Paul writes that we are the pillar of truth. We are the foundation of that truth. And if the church isn't the foundation of truth, where are people going to find the truth then? If it's not in the church. Okay? We look at, we're 20-some days away from the presidential election and other elections too. And somewhere along the line, we have got the idea that the whole history of our nation rests upon who wins the presidency this year. I'm sorry, folks, the destiny of our nation rests upon where we put our God, not on who's going to be sitting in the White House. That when we come back to God, it is in 2 Chronicles that God says, if my people who are called by my name, okay, if they'll pray and seek my face and repent of their evil ways, then I'll hear their prayer. And do what? Forgive their sin, but the first thing he says is what? Heal their land. Okay? So when we decide that we are going to be God's people, that's the very foundation of what this is all about. Now, Elijah's not content with just putting his sacrifice on the altar. He tells them, bring on the water. And he has a ditch dug around there. They just pour water and water and water on them. And then he calls to God for God to bring down the fire. The world is doing a lot of talking. And it seems like the church has remained silent. There's a lot of things going on that are contradictory to the Christian message. But it seems like Norval Campbell was a professor at Centennial when I went to school down there. And we had a personal evangelism class, and I will remember forever his statement, they say that silence is golden, but sometimes it's just plain yellow. If we have this message that is so important, essential, I don't know of anything that is more important than the message that we have. People's eternities rest upon the message that we share. Why are we quiet? If we had a cure for cancer, if we had a cure for diabetes, if we had a cure for a lot of things, we'd be yelling from the rooftops. And now we have a cure for sin. Why have we not been more involved in that message? The challenge to choose. You see, our destiny is not chosen for us, folks. It's chosen by us. That we are the ones that will determine what direction that we're going to go, whether we put our faith and trust in Jesus or not. When will it be that we have taken all that we can and we will stand up for God against the world like Elijah did? comes down. We read here, if you have your Bibles, beginning in verse 21. Right before all this happens, beginning in verse 21 of chapter 18, Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." And the end of that verse says what? People said nothing. Now, if we would translate this literally, he says, how long are you going to live between two positions? When are we going to find his side? You know, Jesus said you're not going to be able to love God and money. You're not going to be able to love God and the material things of this world because you're going to hate one and despise the other. You're going to love one and want nothing to do with the other. So here is Elijah standing up and saying, you believe in God or not? Whoever is the true God, then follow him. And the response of the people is what? Exactly. You know what I think they're doing? We're going to wait and see who wins. We're not going to make any decision right now whatsoever. And I see a lot of people in that kind of situation. Verse 22, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. In the minority? Absolutely not. Years and years ago, we lived in Western Illinois, went to a movie. Remember the movie Jesus that came out many years ago? Young people probably weren't even alive when that came out. But it was the first public showing of Jesus at this theater. And it also involved a new, I knew his name just for a second ago, Bruce Lee movie called A Force of One. He was the martial arts specialist. Neatest thing, when you pull into the theater, the marquee's up, you know what it says? Jesus, a force of one. If I am on God's side, I'm never in the minority. If I am on God's side, I'm never on the wrong side. And we keep talking about God being on our side. I think of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. Do you think God is on your side? And his answer was, I'm not concerned whether he's on our side. I'm concerned whether we're on his or not. That if we are on God's side, we're never in the minority here at all. There's 450 prophets of Baal going through all of this. And Elijah's whole life is coming down to this moment, to this point. Everything that has happened before was just preparation for this to occur. And he stands there and he calls down the fire and it comes down. He makes this great stand of faith. It appears he's outnumbered. He has no chance at all, but the contest is decided by God, not by Elijah. And here he finds himself with this sacrifice in front of him that is burning. His message wasn't so popular, but it was so necessary. That a lot of times we think we're the judge of what is good and what is bad. And that's not the truth at all. That what we have to say may not be what everybody wants to say or wants to hear. But that's not the point. They need to hear it. You've raised children, grandchildren. You've said things to them that they didn't necessarily want to hear, but were necessary for them to hear. All that we're talking about is showing the same kind of concern for those. Can one person really make a difference? Do you believe that? By one vote, Adolf Hitler gained control of the Nazi Party in Germany in 1923. One vote. There's a whole list of things that by one vote, by one person, the difference. Edwin Burke's statement, all that good men have to do for evil to succeed is nothing. One person can make a difference. One person will make the difference. Question that is asked in verse 21. How long are we going to waver between two sides? When are we going to decide whether we believe in the true God or the God of this world? How long will we hold on to one hand of the things of this world and try to hold with one hand to God? There's no neutral ground. There's no middle ground. We keep trying to find it. Well, we go to church, Joe, but we don't want to create any problems, so we don't say anything to our friends and neighbors about Jesus. Indecision is a very dangerous thing. I was driving back home the other day, and these two squirrels, mouthful of nuts, come running across the street. And as I'm coming up on them, there's another car coming from the other way. And you know what they do? They stop there in the middle of the street. Now, if they stay there in the middle of the street, either I or the other car, both of us, are going to hit them. Okay? If we try to stay in the middle of the road as far as Jesus is concerned, we're going to get run over one way or the other. That somewhere along the line, we've got to decide, what do I believe? Where do I put my loyalty? Where is my allegiance? Is it with God or the things of this world? And just be honest and say that. Brian Smoltz was a young man that, there's the question, I guess I didn't put the slide up. But Brian Smoltz was a young man that was doing an internship with a minister. And there was a particular time that a married couple came having some problems and wanted to talk. So he sat in on the conversations, and the wife sat down and talked to him first. And when they got done, the minister looked at her and said, "You are so right. You're so right." And she left the room, and the husband came in and sat down, and they talked for a while. And when they got done talking, the minister looked at the husband and said, "You're so right. You're so right." So after the husband left, Brian asked the minister, "Well, they both can't be right. How could you say they were both right? How could you say that?" And the minister said to Brian, "You're so right. You're so right." When do we take a stand? When do we decide that we are going to be the people of God? He is successful not because the people believed. He is successful because he made the stand for God. It doesn't matter how people respond as far as whether we have fulfilled our, I say responsibility, but it's a privilege also. We make our stand. We have done what is right. We have kept our faith, whether people accept or reject. And it may not be right then that they accept or reject either. So we need to make that stand, and that's what Elijah does. And we can end the story there, but Elijah is a human being. So what happens is he chases down the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, kills them all. Now, my question I always had when I studied this is the prophets of Asherah never showed up. I don't know what happened to those 400 people. But after he has completely destroyed the worship of Baal, and here again we think one person could do that. Well, one person that's making a stand for God can do a lot of things that we think are impossible. But then Jezebel, you know what she says to Elijah? Within 24 hours, you're a dead man. And what does he do? He runs. Okay? Now, before we criticize, before we condemn him, we've been in the same, well, if you've never made a stand for anything, you haven't been in that position. But we see here is poor Elijah has poured his heart out for God. He has made this great stand for God. And the response is what? You ever done that? Have you ever put your heart and soul into something and just gave it the best, and then people are, "Oh, that's nice." Ever been discouraged? Ever been depressed? Ever been completely depressed? Disappointed? And that's where he's at now. He gave it everything he had, and nothing has changed. What he wanted was for the people to stand up and make this once-for-all decision for God. And it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen here because people are fickle many times. And his expectations were based upon the people here. So he takes off. He gets to this juniper tree. And what does he say to God? Just let me die. Now people say, well, he was suicidal. I don't know that he was suicidal. But he was so depressed, he decided it's not worth going on. I gave it my best shot. Look what happened. Okay? So I'm going to stay here, God. I'm going to go to sleep. Please make it so I just don't wake up. Have you ever been there before? So depressed that you just really don't care. Well, when he wakes up, what does he see? This angel giving him some food. Now, is God going to feed you food if he's going to let you die? I don't think so. Okay? And it's amazing because Elijah eats this food and goes and runs to Mount Horeb. 40 days. Here's that. That's a whole other story. So he ends up in this cave. What's he doing in a cave? Well, he's afraid. His dreams that he had seem to be shattered now. What's the sense of even trying here? And we see him so disappointed. So disappointed. And he is burned out. We hear that phrase a lot. Somebody getting burned out. And basically what I've learned, that if your motives become incorrect, that's where you get burned out at. He's burned out because he was looking for people to make a decision. He was focusing everything upon people, not upon God. So he becomes very discouraged, and he goes into this pity party. He exaggerates the situation. What does he say to God? I'm the only one left. And God says, no, you're not. I've got 7,000 of the remnant that are still faithful to me. Whenever we get discouraged, whenever we get depressed, we become very selfish. We start isolating ourselves. We think, oh, I'm the only one that's going through this. Nobody understands what I'm going through. See, what has happened here, Elijah, because he was looking for people to make that decision, he decides that he's been thrown under the bus here. Everybody should have got up and responded to this, but they didn't. That's like I think Elijah probably felt like the little boy. There's three guys that, young men, they go to the zoo. And they're always getting into kind of little trouble, nothing serious. But so it wasn't long they decided to go look at the elephants. And it wasn't long before the security people came up, took them back to the security center, and began to question them what they were doing that caused such a commotion at the elephant cage. So the police asked, give me your name and tell me what you were doing. So the first boy named Gary said, well, my name's Gary, and I was just throwing peanuts into the elephant cage. Okay. The second boy said, what were you doing? He said, well, my name is Larry, and I was just throwing peanuts into the elephant cage. So he went to the third boy, who seemed to be a little shaken up, and says, what's your name? And what were you doing? He said, my name is Peter, but my friends call me Peanuts. I would think Elijah felt like this little boy. That this is not how this is supposed to happen. I got thrown to the side here. I got let go. These people did not respond like they should have. Sometimes we are so overwhelmed with what has happened behind us we can't see in front of us. So many times that it just becomes so difficult that we just can't, the defeat's so great that we cannot see beyond that. How many of you are football fans? On October the 7th of 1916, Georgia Tech University played Cumberland University in football. And the final score of that game was 222-0. Georgia Tech scored 32 touchdowns. Now, that's the most lopsided game ever played in the history of football. How do you suppose Cumberland University players felt after that game? Not sure we're going to play the next one, right? Okay. Aren't we like that many times in life? We become so discouraged that we're not even sure we're going to try the next time. There doesn't seem to be any sense for us to try anymore. What has happened with Elijah, he has lost his sense of purpose. I preached as a prophet, nobody listened, I'm the only one that's left, now what? I don't really care what happens. He has no passion left, he has no power left. That he has made his mistake by determining that his success or failure is based upon human response. And it's not. And even in the condition that he's in, and I want you to draw to this one too, that even though that he has given up, he's disillusioned, he is still God's servant. And God has not given up on him, but it's necessary for God to chastise him. He's in his cave. As we know the story, he is looking for some kind of answer. And what we see happening here, first of all, there's this great wind that comes. Okay? But the Bible says what? God was not in the wind. And then there's this great earthquake that occurs that shakes the very foundation of the mountain. But the Bible says God was not in the earthquake. And then there was this great fire that came. And God wasn't in the fire. And there's this whisper. Still small voice, depending upon the translation you have. And God is there in the whisper. Okay? We want God's power to be displayed. That's what Elijah wanted. But what does God do? He gives us his presence. Not necessarily a demonstration of power. And I'll tell you the truth, folks, if it's between a demonstration of God's power and the assurance of his presence, I'll take his presence every time. That I know that he is with me is a key to a lot of things as far as life is concerned. So he and God have their conversation. You know what? If you read the text, you know what God tells Elijah to do? Go back. One of the most difficult things that we can do as human beings is to go back and face the failure that we made. It's hard. In fact, we have a society running away trying not to do that, to try to pretend it never happened and never deal with the fact, here's where I failed. It's the same way with Moses at the burning bush. He has tried to deliver Israel his way in Egypt. He's killed an Egyptian soldier. He can't go back anymore. And when God appears to him, what did he tell Moses to do? Go back to Egypt. Oh, can't do that. Got to. Got to. Those obstacles that are in the way, many times we need to go back. But I think it's so important here of the question that God asked Elijah. What are you doing here? Who was Elijah? Prophet? What does a prophet do? Go ahead. What does the prophet do? Declares the word of God. To whom? People. How many people are up here on Mount Horeb? So what are you doing here? And then Elijah says, well, I'm the only one left. And God says, no, you're not. I've got 7,000 that have remained faithful. And he's going to introduce him, which is another message completely, to a man named Elisha. That he's not going to be by himself. That he's going to pass his ministry up on to Elisha. But the question then is not only to Elijah, folks, it's to us. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? I've always asked the questions, 3 questions that are based in another message that I preached one time. First question, why did you come here this morning? 2, what did you expect when you came here this morning? And 3, what are you planning to do after you leave here today? What are we doing here? What is our purpose here as far as God is concerned? And I can tell you what it is, but each one of us has to come to terms with that on ourselves. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 33 especially, I think this mentioned in chapter 3, he calls Ezekiel the watchman of Israel. The watchman was a guard over the city. He stood in his tower. And he says to Ezekiel, that's your purpose. And that's the purpose of the church. That we are to declare the warning to people. He says to Ezekiel, if you warn the people and they don't listen, that's their problem. If you warn the people and they do listen, look at what you have saved. But Ezekiel, if you don't warn them at all, then their blood's on your hands. So what are you doing here? Elijah, what are you doing here? He wanted God's power, but God gave him his presence. And he restores that power. He reveals his presence. And then he helps him recapture what his purpose is. And that's what we need to ask God to do for us. I believe the church is not seeing his purpose very clearly anymore. I think it's got fogged up by a lot of personal desires, personal agendas, and traditions and speculations and things like that. And it's starting to get kind of foggy exactly what we're supposed to do as far as God's church is concerned. A time for the church to stand firm on the promises of what God has given us. God challenged Elijah, and I believe he is challenging his church. And then we need to go forth and challenge the world that is before us. That Elijah was God's man in God's place and God's time. Is the church going to be God's vehicle at God's time for the purpose that God has for us? So the question remains, what on earth are we doing for heaven's sake? What are we doing in order to accomplish the goal of God's kingdom? Perhaps it's time for us to draw a line in the sand like Elijah. Lon Tinkle is a man that wrote a book called 13 Days of Glory. Anybody read the book? Are you familiar with the book? Okay. It's the story of the stand at the Alamo. That what these men did, as far as standing there, it talks about Colonel Jim Bowie and all the brave defenders. There were 183 men that were there at the Alamo against thousands of soldiers of Santa Anna during the time for the liberation of Texas. On March the 3rd, William Travis stood up in front of the rest of the men and said to them, reinforcements are not coming. If you stay here, you're going to die. So he took his sword out and he drew a line in the dirt and said, if any of you want to stay here with me, that's certain death, step over that line. And every one of those men stepped over that line except for Jim Bowie. He was so sick, he couldn't get out of bed to walk across the line. So 4 men picked him up and carried him over that line. Did they die? Yes. But because they drew that line in the sand, the Republic of Texas was born. If the church would just draw that line in the sand, saying to the world, nope, this is it. Had enough. We can't give in anymore. And folks, we can't. We can't give in anymore. That there are a lot of churches where the truth is not being preached. There's a lot of churches that are carrying out some kind of social agenda, political agenda. That's not what this place is for. I thought it was kind of amusing, the response I got when someone just a few weeks ago asked me that if President Obama or Mitt Romney came to your church on Sunday, you'd allow them to speak, wouldn't you? And my answer was no, I would not. This is not a place for political agendas. It's a place for spiritual things. It's a place for the preaching of the gospel. That's what the church is about. So the question is, what are we here for? What are we doing here? We have to decide. And if we would decide to draw that line in the sand, watch out, you'll be amazed to what God is going to accomplish through us. Our hymn of invitation and dedication this morning is Fill My Cup, Lord. That there comes a time when we have to look to God and just say, I've struggled with this enough. It's time that I surrender this to you, God, and allow you to give me what I need to accomplish your will. Let's stand together. We're going to sing the first and third.